So we kick things off in the United States, where the US State Department is requesting for extra funds from the US Congress for information countermeasures against Russia and China in Africa. In other words, Antony Blinken is saying that in Africa, we have a lot of Russian propaganda and Chinese propaganda, and they want to give us American propaganda. This subject is very important to me because it's more like an awakening about the world we currently live in. A lot of things are changing. If you've noticed, you've been hearing a lot of things like we're in a multipolar world and the US hegemony is over. So United States may not like that. And right now we're in a position in Africa where our minds have become the new frontier for warfare. You know, there's warfare where we see people shoot guns and drop bombs and the rest of it. But then there's also the information warfare. And I think this information warfare is very important. The same way that a country protects its airspace, its borders, is also the same way I think that we should protect our information space. Now, what I think that probably led to this development where Anthony Blinken is requesting millions of dollars, because initially, if my memory serves me correctly, initially they had requested money from Congress back in 2023 for this same purpose to counter Russia and China's information countermeasures. That's what how they call it, information countermeasures against Russia and China in Africa. So it was included in the budget last year, passed by the Congress. But now he has requested for the State Department has requested for extra funds, meaning that they're probably saying this thing is really important. I'm thinking that what probably led to this is the protest against United States that happened in Niger. You know, the government of Niger had requested that United States remove its military personnel from the country, while they also welcomed the Russians. So when it seemed like US was dragging its feet and they were still having negotiations about that, the people of the Nigerians went to the street in front of the US base in Niger and they were protesting. So probably that was what triggered this whole thing. And at that point, they were like, why is it that the Nigerians or even Africans at large seem to embrace the Russians and the Chinese more than the Americans? So this is probably what led to them requesting for this fund so that they can give us more American propaganda. This reminds me of something that happened. I believe that was 2 weeks ago, probably 2 weeks ago. So when Niger had requested the United States to remove their military personnel from the country, one of the places, at least the rumored places, where the Americans were going to send their troops to set up a new military base, one of the rumored places was in Nigeria. And Nigerians pushed back against that because I even believe that if you have an external military base in your country, you're not a sovereign country. Whoever has a military base in your country can easily control your politics, your and the affairs of your country in general. So I'm not even a fan of having external country military bases in a nation. But having said that, so when that the rumor when the rumor went out that United States was considering setting up military base in Nigeria, Nigerians pushed back against it because it didn't make any sense, in our opinion. So there's this really influential Nigerian investigative journalist, David Hundeyin. He then analyzed what more like a Twitter thread where he spoke about the pros and cons of working with so and so and so, and even why United States should not have a military base in Nigeria. So when he made that tweet, I read it. I thought it was very insightful because then he also spoke about US, he spoke about the Russians and also the Chinese. But when he made that tweet, a Kenyan journalist fact checked his tweet. They didn't address the core topic the core conversation he was talking about, but they just fact checked just a little part of it. But why that triggered me or why that piqued my interest was because I'm like, how can a Nigerian be speaking for the interest of Nigeria? Because there is no how a foreign military base in your country is in the interest of your country. It's not. Most of the time, if you look at all those nations, particularly in Africa, where we have foreign military bases, the situation doesn't tend to turn out well. Why would we fact check the tweets of a Nigerian speaking out for the interest of Nigeria and a US funded because the journalist wrote it in Voice of America. So this is a US media outlet in essence fact checking and a Nigerian journalist speaking in the interest of Nigeria. I thought that was very interesting. If we don't know what's going on now, I think it's really important at this point for Africans to be aware. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a war, and the war is in the information space more than it is on the military field, more than it is dropping bombs and shooting guns. There's a war in the information space, and it is in our interest. It's in the interest of Africa to to push information that benefits us. Now let's look at this. If United States, if an African journalist fact checks another African journalist speaking up for the interest of an African nation in a US publication, it doesn't make any sense. There's a battle for your mind. And the earlier we realize this and put our efforts to protecting it, the better for us. Because if we are going to let foreign outlets, foreign media outlets, control what we see and what we know, it could spell disaster for our countries, our respective countries in Africa. For example, I'm going to give you the case of Ukraine. Before this Russia Ukraine war kicked off, initially they had run polls. That was some years ago, several years ago. The United States had funded polls in in Ukraine to know the people's how they feel about joining NATO, and most Ukrainians didn't want to join NATO. Most Ukrainians thought it was in the interest of Ukraine to be neutral, which was right, which was the correct stand. Do you understand where I'm coming from? So why did it change? Media. It changed because of media, because the United States invested more in the media space to counter Russian propaganda in Ukraine, telling the people that it's in their interest to join NATO. Now, at the end of the day, see why Ukraine is today. I'll give you a second instance. What's going on? Probably you have seen what's going on in Georgia, where the people have been protesting against a Russian um, law that the parliament in Georgia, uh, well, they finally passed it. They passed the parliament. The idea of that law is it's the idea of it is it's that every foreign funded NGOs or media, but foreign funded institutions, they need to disclose where their funding is coming from because the government of Georgia, they want to be sure whose interest these institutions, whether it's media institutions or NGOs, whatever it is, they want to be sure whose interest that these institutions are working for. And the people went into the streets to protest. How? And then they called it a Russian law. But at the end of the day, yes, Russia has that kind of law, but it's actually an American law. The United States has had that law for maybe like 100 years. So if anything, Russia copied from the Russia copied from the US, and then Georgia is also copied from the US. In the United States, it's called the FARA Act. Do you get where I'm coming from? But why are the people protesting? They're literally protesting that they do not want transparency in their country. How can you protest not wanting transparency? Why? Media, information. Because the people are being told that so and so thing is not good for them. And many of them may not research. They may not take time to dig into the the law to know what it's actually about. And they just went to the streets, oh, our government is being crazy, blah blah blah. But they don't know that the law the government is trying to put in place is in the benefit of Georgia. Do you understand where I'm coming from? So why am I saying this? If the State Department has requested more funding counter Russia and Chinese propaganda in Africa, I need you to know that you're about to see more information set up in a way that is going to be benefiting external players. And that's me trying to put this thing nicely. You're going to see media, you're going to see effort both with your mainstream media, both with your social media, maybe even bots pushing a certain narrative. And like I told you with you in the case of Ukraine and in the case of Georgia, that narrative that is being pushed may not necessarily be in the interest of your country because it's very easy to use media to push a certain narrative. And then the people take that narrative as truth. For example, let me give you another example. We hear so much about Chinese debt trap in Africa. Oh, that the Chinese they are using their loans to trap Africans and the African countries, blah 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 blah. Okay. But It's not quite true. Yes, maybe countries like Zambia. Yes, Zambia, if I'm not mistaken. I believe it's Zambia, but I will put it on the screen when I get the exact when I verify. But I think maybe countries like Zambia, they are, most of their debt is owed to China. But in the case of a country like Nigeria, it's not. We don't have a Chinese debt trap problem compared to the IMF and the World Bank. Most of Nigeria's debt is IMF and World Bank. So in that case, it's actually US debt trap, not Chinese debt trap. And this is the case in several countries. Egypt is IMF. If you look at Egypt, it's IMF. Ghana, it's IMF. So you find out that we are owing the IMF and the World Bank who have trapped us compared to, as opposed to China. But no, when you ask the average social media user in any African country, oh, they say, yeah, yeah, it's Chinese debt trap. But if you look at the fact, it's not really true. The debt trap is with the IMF and the World Bank, not with China. Yes, we are owing China, of course. Do you know how much China has given different countries in Africa? Of course. But like I'm saying, what I'm trying to say is the situation is different in different African countries. If Nigeria has a debt trap, our debt trap is with the IMF and with World Bank, not with China. So you're going to see more things like this to push a certain narrative. And the narrative that is being pushed may not necessarily be in the interest of your country, may not necessarily be in the interest of Africa. This is the reason why that we as Africans, we need to wake up. There is a war going on. Yes, they are not shooting, they are not throwing bombs. We are not seeing drones. We are not seeing intercontinental ballistic missiles. That does not mean there is no war going on. There's a war going on. There's a battle is for your mind. The battle is for your mind. Maybe when the Americans saw the Nigerians go to the streets to protest their evacuation of their troops and their military base from their country, the United States didn't expect it. It's the same thing we saw in Burkina Faso. They didn't expect it. So if you think you've seen anything, we're about to see way more, and which is why it's important. It's I cannot emphasize it enough. It is very, very important for you to take care about the information you consume and what you take as truth, but concerning your country and its relations with other nations around the world. So now, speaking of Russian propaganda, is there Russian propaganda in Africa? Very likely. Is there any Chinese propaganda in Africa? Most probably. But then we also have American propaganda. And let's be honest, the media outlets we tend to consume news from is not from. If I ask the average Nigerian or the average Gabonese or the average Zambian or the average Kenyan about RT or CGTN, they may not know. But if I say CNN, we know CNN, we know BBC, we know New York Times, we know the Washington Post. So we know this, and these are Western American led outlets. So if that is where we actually get our news from, I debate and I argue that we have more American propaganda in Africa than we have Russian or Chinese propaganda. Many of us use social media platforms owned by which country? American social media platforms. Our YouTubes, our Twitter, our Instagram, Facebook, they're all American owned. China now we have it with TikTok, but most of these social media apps, even your WhatsApp, it's American owned. So we are more exposed to American propaganda than we are exposed to Chinese or Russian propaganda. So I'm saying this now because we're about what we have seen so far. What we have seen so far is going to be a joke compared to what is about to come. You are going to see a systematic campaign in Africa for your mind. Systematic campaign to capture your mind, to feed you information that may not necessarily be true or be in the interest of your country. So, what's the solution? Now is the time to practice critical thinking. Don't just take something as true because you heard it somewhere. You heard them say it on BBC or on CNN. Don't just take it as true because somebody said it on social media. Someone tweeted. You don't even know the person that tweeted. You don't know if it's a bot that tweeted it. When you see an information, take a step back and think about it. Does this thing make sense? Is this thing really true? If you don't know, research. Everybody has another American owned outlet. Google. Everybody has access to search engines. Put your search engine and do a quick research, maybe 15, 20 minutes. a quick research because you need to be sure that the information you parrot, the things that you say and the things that you consume are true. They are true. Other than that, I think another thing that we need to take seriously in Africa is media. So you where you are, start your own media outlet. What do I don't mean you have to start a big TV station. All those things are expensive. Take your camera and start talking about the things in your country. Start talking about your politics and how it affects your country. Make it your responsibility. Make it your responsibility because it is only Africans that will follow through the interest of Africa. Nobody can be more committed to the growth and development of Africa quite like Africans. And if you're not committed, well, we have a lot of we have a lot of work to do. But that's what I'm trying to tell you. When you see the Americans come here, or the Chinese come here, or the Russians come here, or the Europeans come here, anybody at all come here, they are coming for their interest. Sometimes that interest and the interest of your own country may not align. So it is in your favor, it is your responsibility to check, does this thing benefit Sudan? Does this thing benefit Morocco? Does this benefit South Africa? Does it benefit Rwanda? Does it benefit Madagascar? Now is the time that we need to take you need to take your time to check. Does it if it benefits, fine, then we can work with them and we can get the job done. But if it doesn't benefit, use your little little citizen journalism, your YouTube channel, your Twitter handle, your Instagram handle. Use all these things to, to raise alarm. Use all this to push the narrative that this thing is not in the interest of your country. So right now, I believe that we've come to the time where every single African, living in Africa, or even Africans in diaspora, we need to get to that point where we take it as our responsibility to protect the interest of our respective nations. Because, like I said before, there's a war going on, and the battlefield is your mind.